Senators of Rome, I stand before you to urge the path of honor. We must not yield to Carthage, though it demands my life. Honor binds us to our oath.
In 250 BC, a man stood before the Roman Senate and argued, with all the skill of a trained commander, against his own survival. 5 years earlier, he had been captured by Carthage. Now Carthage had sent him home to negotiate a peace or an exchange of prisoners. And before he left, they made him swear an oath. If he failed, he would return to his chains, to whatever Carthage decided to do with a man who had once burned its fields. He stood in his own city and told the Senate to refuse. Carthage would get back young officers, Rome would get back spent men, himself included. The Senate agreed. Then came the argument nobody had prepared for. His friends begged him to stay. His wife and sons begged him to stay. Some argued the oath itself was void. A promise extracted by an enemy binds no one. Nothing on earth could force him back through those gates. Nothing except the oath. His name was Marcus Atilius Regulus. He said goodbye, boarded a ship, and returned to Carthage, where, the ancient writers tell us, he died in torment. Historians have doubted the details for 2000 years. Some of it may be the Roman invention, but notice what cannot be invented. 2 centuries later, when Cicero searched all of Roman history for the supreme example of fides, of faith kept, he chose a man walking back through a gate he did not have to walk through. When a civilization decides what a man is, it reaches for a story like this one. This is not a video about honesty. Honesty is about the present, telling the truth about what already is. A word, a promise, an oath, a vow is stranger and heavier. A claim about the future made by a creature who cannot see the future. This is the philosophy of the given word, what it is, what it costs, when it becomes dangerous, and why a world that no longer believes in it cannot stop depending on it. Begin with the words themselves. The Latin sacramentum, the soldier's oath, was at its root a deposit, a sum placed in sacred hands, forfeited if you broke faith. To give your word was to put a piece of yourself where you could not take it back. In Hesiod, Horkos, oath is not a concept but a god, born of strife, whose single function is to hunt down perjurers. Even a god who broke an oath sworn on the Styx lay breathless for a year, banished from heaven for 9 more. The Greeks gave their gods every freedom to lie, to seduce, to murder, but not the freedom to break a sworn word. And in Rome, the sanctuary of fides kept the state's treaties, her priests performing her rites with the right hand wrapped in white cloth. The hand you swore with kept clean, kept apart. A civilization that conquered the world by the sword treated the open hand as its most sacred object. Why such reverence for something as ordinary as a promise? Because the word was the first infrastructure, before writing, before courts, before enforcement. Everything that made civilization possible, trade between strangers, marriage between families, peace between tribes, ran on the spoken word and nothing else. Civilization did not begin with the wheel or with fire. It began the first time one human being said, "I will," about tomorrow, and tomorrow did. The deepest question here was asked by Nietzsche at the opening of the Genealogy of Morals, second essay, to breed an animal with the right to make promises. Is this not the paradoxical task nature has set itself in the case of man? An animal lives in the present, it forgets, and forgetting is a mercy. And you are an animal. Your moods shift, your circumstances shift, everything in you is built to drift and let go. A promise is a declaration of war against all of it. When you give your word, you assert that the I who speaks today will still command the I who wakes in a month, tired, tempted, holding a better offer. Nietzsche called it the memory of the will. A promise is the only bridge a human being can build to a place that does not exist yet. What Hannah Arendt called islands of security in an ocean of uncertainty. You cannot know the future, you cannot control it, you can only be someone in it. That is the first pillar. A man's word is not information about the future, it is the man himself, sent ahead, holding a position until his body arrives. The second pillar is the one the modern world most wants to forget. A word only becomes real at cost, kept because keeping it was convenient. A coincidence, kept because breaking it would be punished. A calculation, The word cannot even be seen until the moment when breaking it would be easier, cheaper, safer than keeping it. Everything before that moment is theater. The oath begins where the incentives end. Kant proved the logic, universalized the lying promise, and promising itself dies. The lie destroys the mechanism it needs in order to work. But the deepest layer is not what a broken word does to the institution, it is what it does to the man. Every word you give opens an account with a single auditor. The world forgets your broken promises with astonishing speed. You never do. Socrates answered this with his life. When Crito arrived at the prison with bribed guards and an open road, he refused to run.
Socrates, the ship from Delos has returned. Escape now, before it is too late. My friend, would I betray my principles now? I choose to stay. But the hemlock! Think of your family! My duty is to Athens.
Because 70 years under the laws of Athens was an agreement, never signed, never spoken, but an agreement. And to flee now would announce that his word held only while it paid. He drank the hemlock, a man keeping his word to a city that had just voted to kill him. What is the most that keeping your word has ever cost you? Not the promises that were easy, the one that hurt. If nothing comes to mind, you do not yet know whether you have a word. You have a hypothesis, untested, and there is a version of this test that runs every day. The words you give yourself. These are the most broken promises on earth. No court hears them, no reputation hangs on them. When you tell yourself at midnight that tomorrow the discipline begins and negotiate your way out by 7 a.m., no one sees the default except the most important someone. The first person who learns that your word is worthless is you. A man who has learned it through hundreds of quite private defaults carries that knowledge into every room. Others cannot name what is missing, but they feel it. His sentences arrive without collateral. Aristotle said we become what we repeatedly do. Then character is exactly this, the ledger of kept and broken words, most of them heard by no one. The ancients swore in daylight before witnesses, so the dark hour would have nothing left to decide. That is all a code is, a few sentences spoken in daylight that midnight is not allowed to renegotiate. Now the part that cracks the philosophy open. If the video ended here, it would be a clean, inspiring, half-true lie. The oath is not a virtue, it is a technology. And like every technology, it amplifies whatever it is attached to. The Trojan War begins with an oath. Years before Troy, the suitors of Helen swore to defend whichever man won her. Then Helen left with Paris, the oath activated, and 1,000 ships were dragged toward Troy by men bound to a sentence spoken years earlier. At Aulis, when the winds died, Agamemnon, trapped between his oath and his own blood, put his daughter on the altar and kept his word. He kept his word, that is the horror. The oath did exactly what oaths do. It held while it pulled a knife across a girl's throat. Herod swore before his dinner guests to give a dancing girl whatever she asked. She asked for the head of John the Baptist. The gospel is precise about why the execution happened, because of his oaths and because of the guests. He did not kill the prophet out of hatred, he killed him out of consistency. Then the 20th century built the largest version of this machine ever constructed. In August 1934, the German armed forces swore unconditional obedience, not to the constitutions, not to the country, but to one man, by name, Adolf Hitler. For a decade, that single sentence worked as the most effective moral anesthetic in modern history. But I have sworn. The technology invented to make man reliable had become the alibi of evil, which is what makes Klaus von Stauffenberg essential here. He had sworn that oath. In July 1944, he carried a bomb into Hitler's headquarters and broke it, knowing exactly what oath-breaking meant to a man of his formation, his class, his fate. The plot failed. He was shot that same night. He did not break his word cheaply. He broke a lower word because a higher one held him, and he paid with his life. That is the entire difference between a traitor and a man of conscience. This liar breaks his word and reaches for an explanation. The man of conscience breaks his word and reaches for the bill. So the philosophy is not never break your word. Herod hid behind that. It has two commandments. Know what your word is attached to before you give it. because the word will hold even if what it serves rots. And know that words exist in a hierarchy. Breaking a lower word for a higher one can be the most serious act of fidelity available. Provided the full price is paid, there is no version of this philosophy in which words are free. Which brings us to us. We have attempted something no civilization ever dared, a world where words are free. We say I promise about phone calls. We click I agree beneath contracts we will never read. We replaced the handshake with the signature with the checkbox, the God with the lawyer, assuming that if the courts were strong enough, character would become unnecessary. The result is the great paradox of the modern world, the most heavily constructed civilization in history and one of the least trusting. The money in your pocket is not backed by gold, it is backed by a sentence, believed until the moment it isn't. Most marriages do not die in one great betrayal, but in 1,000 micro defaults of small words. I'll be there, I'll stop, I'll listen. Each one recorded in the ledger no court can subpoena. The contract was never the foundation, it was scaffolding around the foundation. The foundation was always a person, saying a sentence, and being the kind of creature for whom the sentence is load-bearing. There's an old endpoint to this philosophy. On a hillside in Galilee, Jesus told his listeners to swear not at all. Let your yes be yes, and your no, no. People read this as a rejection of oaths. It is the opposite. It is the oath completed. The stage where the technology becomes unnecessary because the man has become the guarantee. An oath is scaffolding. It exists because your yes is weak. The building that needs its scaffolding forever was never finished. Return, one last time, to the gate of Rome. On his last morning, Regulus was the safest man in the world. Carthage could not touch him. The Senate would have shielded him. The loophole had been offered. His wife was holding his arm, and if he stayed, almost nothing would have been lost. History would have forgotten a minor broken parole. He would have kept his house, his family, his name, his future. He would have kept everything except the thing that made him, him. A man's word is the single possession on earth that cannot be taken from him. Not by an enemy, not by torture, not by time. It can only be given or thrown away. The man who walked back to Carthage would die. The man who stayed in Rome would merely continue. And of those two fates, he judged the second one worse. The story may be polished, the torture may be legend. It does not matter. Every civilization that amounted to anything kept one story like this and told it to its sons. Regulus at the gate, Socrates in the cell, Stauffenberg at the wall. Because every civilization knew it was not held up by walls or laws or armies. It was held up by an invisible architecture of kept words, rebuilt in every generation, one man at a time, in rooms no one sees. You are one of the builders this morning, so the question Regulus leaves at the gate is not whether you admire him, it is smaller and much heavier. Somewhere in your life, there's a word you gave to someone or to yourself that has started to cost more than you expected. You know the one. The whole philosophy is what you do next.